Hello and good evening to all of you. For me, it's morning. Happy September 13th. My name is Dr. Tamar Andrews, and I'm joining you today for the fourth session of our Parenting During the Pandemic. A few housekeeping notes. There is a chat box and a Q&A section. You are more than welcome to ask any of your questions during any of my presentation. Make sure that you type it in to the best of your ability as soon as you think of your question so you don't forget it. And I will stop my presentation after several points in order to check the chat box and see if there's any questions. So let me first start by saying that today we're going to talk about how not to spoil your child to the point where they become a spoiled brat. I want to change some of the language though. I know that's the language that we usually use. But when we talk about the word spoiled, we often think of fruit or vegetables or food that's gone bad and there's no way to make it good again. So let's take that word spoiled out of our vocabulary because we're not ruining our children, and there's always ways to change our parenting styles and ensure that we bring our children back on track to where we need them to be. The second thing is the word brat. In English, the word brat has a very negative connotation, and we think about it in terms of a child that we just don't want to be around. I spoke last week about the fact that when a child doesn't know how to talk, we teach. When they don't know how to walk, we teach. When they don't know how to ride a bike, we teach. And when they don't know how to behave, we teach. So it's important that we model the behaviors for children that we always want them to have. I have a little picture in my next slide. This is from a very famous movie called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And there was one of the little girls who won the golden ticket. And all she ever used to say was, "I want it now!" And she would scream and yell. Some of the worst language that a child can use to their parents is, "I want it." And when asked why, it's because everybody else has it. In fact, I want you to think about the things that are in your own closet now. Some of those name brands. Why is it that you specifically went and bought those things from a specific designer or store? It's because everybody else was buying it and you felt like in order to fit in and be part of your social group, you needed to have something that made you fit in and belong. So I want you to think about what you do in your behavior as well, and then what you're trying to teach your child. And we're going to come back to that in a few moments. There is a term that we use called affluenza, and affluenza is a psychological condition, if you will, and it affects wealthy young people where they have a lack of motivation because nothing really motivates them because they get everything they want. It has no feelings of guilt because I never have to have consequences to my behaviors. And it also creates, believe it or not, a sense of isolation because people don't like being around them. And that's important to remember because no matter how many things you have, the most important things you need to have are a good character. And we're going to get to that in a minute. So my next picture, I want you to think about the person who has been the meanest to you in your life. It might have been your boss. It might have been a coworker. It might have been a friend, a teacher, a doctor, anybody in your life who is the meanest person that you can remember, something horrible that happened to you, and recognize that they were not born that way. That in order for somebody to become this, somebody had to allow it or teach them. So now I want you to think to any of the times that you might have behaved this way to somebody. It might have been to your child, to your spouse, to your parents, to your friends, or to the lady who was making your coffee at the store. And recognize that your children are going to watch everything that you do, and you are going to model the person that they are going to become. So let's figure out ways of how to make sure that that doesn't happen. So the first thing is, I want you to remember never to make it easy. It's more difficult in many ways to raise a wonderful child than it is to raise a spoiled brat, if you use that old language. And the reason why is because nowadays we have access to so much more than our families or even we had when we were young. For example, when I was little, I would go ride my bike in the neighborhood. I would leave on a Saturday or Sunday morning, probably at 9 o'clock after breakfast with my friends, and we wouldn't come back, especially in the summer, until 6 or 7 o'clock at night. That meant that if we fell, if we ran out of money, if we got lost, there were no cell phones. We had to figure out the way to get back on our own. It wasn't easy, but it was challenging and it was exciting and it was exhilarating. Now, every child has a cell phone, or every child has money, or every child has access to things that we didn't have access to, and things are too easy. So what has to happen is that we have to act like parents again. My parents always, and my grandparents, expected obedience, and they expected respect, and they expected to raise children who were resourceful and happy. And nowadays, if you're always trying to make your child's life easier by solving their problems, offering them every single opportunity to be their cheerleader, it's more likely that they're going to be spoiled because they're not learning through challenge. Think about going to the gym, and I use this example frequently. When we go to the gym or we try to exercise, we're not going to lose that weight or get those muscles if we're not having a challenge. If it's too easy, nothing is happening. The next thing I want you to remember is to always set limits. Most parents, and I'm going to get, first of all, let me tell you, this sounds very easy, but it's not. And I'm going to get to how to make it easier when I'm finished with these items. Most parents have no idea how to set limits. We're either working too hard, we come home too tired, we're too busy, or we only enforce those limits when we're really at the end of our rope and we're exhausted. And I start screaming, or I start doing something that I just don't know what to do. And what you really want to have as your mantra is peaceful parent, happy kids. If you're calm, and I've spoken about this as well before, always speak low and slow. Peaceful parents, happy children. So you want to stop the yelling and start connecting with your child, allowing them to understand that you have set and you're going to stick to your clear limits so that your kids don't push and push and push until you get to the end of your rope. Realize that setting limits doesn't always have to be delivered as harsh punishment. It just has to be delivered in a firm and respectful way to your child. Focus on what's important. Although you don't want to really set rigid expectations about everything. Not everything has to have a rule. You do want to have rules and limits about those things that you consider to be non-negotiable. So although it might, annoy your child that he doesn't put his socks on in the morning, or he doesn't throw his dirty clothes into the hamper right away, the non-negotiable in my house is treating others with respect, treating me, actually, I should say, with respect. And so it's important that we understand those things. The next thing, too, that you want to understand is, let's see, let me go to my next slide, right there. You want to acknowledge their feelings. So everyone wants to feel that their feelings matter and that I'm important and that, you're acknowledging it. So make sure that every time your child gets frustrated or mad or sad, that the first thing out of your mouth is, I see you're angry. Sometimes we know that mom or dad are not going to go back on what they're saying, that we know it's non-negotiable. I just want you to see that I'm upset with it. I just want you to know that I'm not okay with it, but I do respect you and I'm going to follow the rules. Even when your children are upset and acting out, make sure they know that they can't get what they want, but that they can feel what they want to feel. If you say things like, don't be mad, don't be sad, what you're telling them is that they're actually wrong in feeling the way they feel and their reactions are inappropriate. Remember that children are emotionally irregular, that they're emotionally immature, that they don't yet have great integration between their limbic or their emotional brain and their executive functioning brain. So you actually want children to acknowledge that their feelings that they're feeling are okay. They just can't get what they want. And then when you acknowledge those feelings, remember that you're not going to give in. It's hard to stay firm, especially when your kids are whining and complaining and you're tired and you're hungry and it's past their bedtime and your child's having that meltdown for the 20th time in the week. But when you give in, more bratty behavior will follow because now they're learning that they just have to push your buttons a little bit harder. But if you stand firm, arms, let me just show you, arms folded, and say, I see that you're upset, but it's bath time and we're going to go to the bath right now. Your child will understand that mom is confident or dad is confident. We are secure in what we're doing. We know what we're doing. And even though you don't understand today, you're going to have to follow through. And as I said a few moments ago with that photo, you have to be the role model. If you fly off the handle at a moment's notice, if you throw a fit yourself when the coffee is not made to your liking, or somebody doesn't do some repairs on your home the way you actually wanted it to happen, and if instead of having an adult, mature conversation, you're yelling and screaming and making threats, children are going to learn to regulate their emotions based on what they see you doing. You can't just tell them what not to do. You have to model the appropriate behavior that you want. It's interesting. And I remember going into a store with my children. It was a bagel store. We were going to have some breakfast and I was late to school to drop them off at school, and I was going to go drive them and stop somewhere for breakfast. And a woman drove up. I guess she had been in the store before, and she drove up in her very, very brand new expensive Mercedes with her little bag of bagels, and she ran into the store and she started yelling at the woman who worked behind the counter, who spoke very little English, yelling and screaming about all kinds of things that were wrong with her order. And that woman behind the counter, you could tell she was going to start crying. She was so upset. And my children, all four of my children, were right behind me. And I thought, oh, number one, I can't let my children see that this behavior is okay. And number two, I also want to model the behavior that I'm going to stand up for somebody. So I moved my body in between this very irate, yelling woman and the glass counter. And I said, I see you're upset, acknowledging. Maybe this woman will help you better if you can talk so she can understand you. As you can see, she can't really understand. And the woman instead turned to me and started yelling at me, telling me not to mix in. So I said, I am mixing in because I don't like the way you're treating this woman. And she started to yell at me even more and more. And you could tell that some of the other employees were coming to now have a little more confidence because I'm standing up for them. And as soon as I started speaking for about maybe 10 seconds, a few more customers started standing behind me. I could feel one of my sons holding my hand tighter, maybe scared, didn't want me to get hurt. But also I could sense a sense of pride that I was standing up for this woman. And I didn't recognize the impact of my actions until about 5 years later, when the principal of that same son's school called me into the office. And I thought, oh no, what has my son done? My son's in trouble, because you never want to be called to the school, to the principal's office. I walked in and there is my son standing in the principal's office. He's got a grin, a really nice grin on his face. And the principal said, I called you because I shared something with your son, Daniel, but I needed to share it with you as well. There was a boy who was being picked on in the school, not in Daniel's class, and Daniel put his body in between the bully and the boy who was being picked on with his arms crossed and said, you can't treat him that way. And I wanted to bring you in to share how proud we were, and we're going to be giving Daniel an award this week. And I thought, oh my gosh. And I went home that night and I thought, where did he learn that? I don't remember ever standing up to a bully. And so I had a conversation with Daniel and I said, how did you know to do that? And he said, oh, from the bagel store. It was so long ago. And I didn't realize the impact of that until that moment when I started seeing what had happened with Daniel. So it's very important that we act as role models as well. You never know when it's going to come to play. The next thing that's important to know is that you've got to act quickly. Anytime your child is fighting and you want to intervene or help them in some way, don't wait. Step in before you're going to lose it. So if, for example, you have two children and they're fighting, and you know that in a few minutes you're going to go in and start yelling, don't wait until they push those buttons on you and you start yelling. Walk in now, and again with that low and slow tone, simply say something like, I'm curious, what's the problem here? I can't hear myself think. If you step in before you lose it, what you do is you teach them to solve their problems before they lose it. See the connection? The next thing is instill a sense of gratitude and generosity. When other kids are in, when your kids help others in need, when they step in to lend a helping hand, when they offer to share something that they have, it helps them to be grateful for what they do have. So make sure that you always model those things as well, and then to be thankful for what they have. So say things at the dinner table like, isn't it nice that we can all have dinner together and that we're so lucky to have all of this food? Ask all kinds of things. And Anna Maria, hi. I see you're just saying hello. Check the chat box because it never tells me what's happening in there. The key, however, is when we talk about good deeds and being thankful, it's not to force this down their throats because you want it to be intrinsic, not extrinsic. So for example, instead of making them throw away last year's toys, let them come up with some of their own ways to contribute to the greater good. So if you see that their toys are just amassing and they've got piles and piles and piles of toys and you don't know what to do with it, don't go in there and just throw it out and say, oh my God, this is old. Come up with ideas for how they should solve the problem. Research has shown that children will learn to be generous by having the experience of giving to someone else or sharing with someone else. So, and noticing how it feels. I remember for one of my daughters, her class had done a project on, I can't remember what the project was, but they were doing some kind of project. And my daughter came home and said, Mom, do you know that there are children who are abused and they have to run away, sometimes with their mommies or sometimes away from their mommies and daddies because their mommies and daddies are hurting them. And I thought, wow, she's learning about this. It really resonated with her. So that year for her birthday party, we had a conversation, and instead of bringing gifts to her, we asked her friends to all bring unwrapped gifts for an abuse shelter. We stopped at the abuse shelter first. We weren't actually even allowed to go in because you're not allowed to see who's in there. But we had all the girls go and drop the presents off one at a time at the doorway and leave it at that shelter. And then we went off and I think we played miniature golf or laser tag, I can't remember. And about a week later, we got all these thank you cards, anonymous, but thank you cards from the kids. And we had the girls all come back for the birthday that had been at the birthday party, and each one opened up the letter, read it out loud to everybody else. And ever since then, I think my daughter is actually the most generous of all my children. And of all my kids, I have 4 kids, 4 are in tech, and she is an occupational therapist. And I think it's because she wanted to do something to feel the connection with helping other people directly. I'm actually putting that together right now as I'm talking. That's so incredible. Be a confident parent. So instead of reacting, try to make your child happy when you discipline, accepting their feelings and having the confidence to stick to your own parenting because you know that what you're doing is the right thing. And if we keep doing the right thing, our children will grow up to do the right thing as well. And you know, at the end of the day too, I know it's really hard to do this kind of parenting and to stick to all of this, but at the end of the day, you've got to really ride it out. Just stick with it and realize that as hard as it is now or today or in this moment, that eventually you're going to reap the benefit of what it is that you're doing and see the rewards. Anna Maria, you're looking for the recorded session. I am going to actually see if maybe one of the other co-hosts will answer that for you, as I'm pretty sure these are recorded, but I'm not entirely sure. But you're always more than welcome to contact me. So now that I've gone through all of these things, I do want to share with you some of the things that are going to help you through this, because I know this is a lot to take in. But it's also important to remember that this is not going to be an easy transition. If you have been one of those parents that have contributed to some of your child's indulgent ways, realize that you can stop and turn the tide now. You can change and be a different parent starting this moment, but that it's going to be uncomfortable to stand your ground, and realize that you're going to have to expect some resistance from your child or your children, allowing them to cry and be upset. And the reason why is because you're a different parent now. I used to be able to push my parents' limits and push the boundaries and get what I want. Oh my gosh, all of a sudden today I'm not getting what I want. They are going to push harder and harder. They're going to scream louder and louder until they have learned that you have turned the tide and you're a different parent. So get used to that. You're also going to have to get used to saying no without guilt. One of the worst things I've ever heard parents say is, I'm sorry, but no, you can't have that. Really? Are you sorry? When we say sorry, we have taught our children that when we say sorry, it means that we've done something wrong. So if you say, I'm sorry, no, what you're really saying is, you can't have that, but I've made a mistake by telling you you can't have that. That somehow I've done something wrong, but you still can't have it. Do you understand how that's confusing to a child? So you have to say no without the guilt and without saying sorry. And that's one of the biggest rules I can probably teach you today. And the reason, I'm going to stop sharing because that's the end of the slideshow, and now you can actually see me. And I can see if there's any questions. Let's see, we have a raised hand from Marie Jane Arroyo. Okay, let me stop for a second. Oh, I think this is just in the Q&A. Let me just see if there's any open. Okay, I can't really always tell what my Q&A is saying, so okay. Oh, Marie Jane Arroyo, you're gonna have to unmute, my love. Did you have a question? I wanna make sure I don't get too far and lose the topic of the question we're dealing with. Marie Jane Arroyo, or you can also type your question here into the chat. Okay, I'm going to wait. And if you do unmute yourself or type your question, I'll be more than happy to answer it, but I'll continue until we have that question going. How's that? I hope that's okay. All right, so as I said, make sure that you don't have the guilt. And remember that children will actually accept those limits that you give them if you do it with grace. And I want you to think, how would you discipline or how would you teach your child if you were doing it on the Paris fashion show runway? You would do it calmly, collectedly, with your head held high, with a smile on your face, and connecting, trying to look and smile and connect to the people in your audience. So make sure that when you do this, that you do it without saying sorry, but with poise and with grace. Make parenting an art form, if you will. And again, you're always welcome to connect with me privately, and I'll give you some tips. Emphasize also that giving is better than receiving. I know we always hear that, and we pay lip service to it as well. But if you start boosting that concept, that who you are is more important than what you own, so that children will realize that it's not as important to own that new pair of Nike sneakers. It's more important to walk in them with respect and with pride. That it's really nice to have that newest designer dress, but it's more important who the person inside that dress is and how they behave. Using language like that to teach children that character counts. And practice gratitude as a family. At the dinner table, although the dinner table is great, but children can always run away. And I know now with the pandemic, it's hard to get to restaurants, although I know here, at least in California, some of them are opening. Whenever I wanted to have a conversation with my children about a topic that I thought was really meaningful to me, I always made sure to do it at a restaurant. And I know that sounds kind of weird. It is something that if you have some money, you can afford to do. But the reason why is because at a restaurant, you sit there and you sit down and then you talk about what you're going to order and what you're going to eat. You can talk about what's healthy. And then what you do is you order your food. You can talk about how to order food respectfully. And then you have to wait 10 or 15 minutes until that food comes. And so if you simply lean into your child and say, let's talk about blank, and you talk about a topic that's important, you have a captive audience. Your child can't go anywhere. The other really great time that's good to talk about things that are happening in your life are right before bedtime. As you tuck your child into bed, they don't want to go to sleep. And so you can ask them a question such as, do you want to go to sleep now? Or what if we have a conversation for 5 or 10 minutes? Your child will almost always want to have that conversation because they don't want to go to sleep. And it's a great time to talk for 2 reasons. Number 1, they want to talk so that they don't have to go to sleep. And number 2, it is very often that the last things we remember before we fall asleep are the things that are ingrained more into our memory. So if you talk about some of these really great topics, such as gratitude and how to be respectful and how to help fight for a bully who might be bullied at school, those are the things that will actually stay in your child's brain. They will dream about, and it'll go from that chemical memory to the structural memory, to that long-term memory. So if you want to teach them to be considerate of others, especially when children's lives are all about me, 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 try simply shifting the focus from me to we. So look for everyday moments to do so. For example, what do you think daddy would want to order today? Or how do you think daddy feels today? Ask your friend what they would like to play instead of the game that you want to play. Or let's go volunteer to clean up the neighborhood. Remember that kids respond best to encouragement, not punishment. So make sure that everything is something that you encourage them to do rather than you're punishing them to do. As I said at the top of this lecture today, focus more on what the child is or the adult is that you want them to be rather than punishing them for the things that you don't want them to do. Help your child meet the expectations that you have for them and help them appreciate those little things in life. And oh, what a world it could be. Okay, that is my lecture, my half-hour spiel for today, and I'm open to any questions. So what are the challenges that you have right now with helping your children become people that you want them to become? And you can either unmute yourself or you can ask the questions in the question area. Otherwise, I've done a really great job and nobody has any questions. Wow, easy lecture today, huh? Okay, maybe we'll just open this up to any parenting questions any of you have. So for those of you that are here today, you're here because you wanted to learn something. Hit me with your questions. Wow, radio silence. Okay, I'll give it about another 2 or 3 minutes to see if there's any questions we need. Otherwise, it'll be an early Sunday today. And again, you can either type your questions in the chat, in the Q&A, or unmute yourself. Okay, I think we might be done for today if there are no questions. Let's see. So let's see. Let me ask you this. Okay, what are the hardest things you find in trying to make your children grateful? So what are some of the things that you think that your children struggle with the most in being grateful? I'm actually curious because you know, sometimes I'll give you, well, here, I'll give you an example. Um, I have 4 children, and I have a daughter who came up to me one day and said, "Mom, what are you wearing?" And she kind of gave me a look about my shirt, and then looked to the back to see what label it was, and all of a sudden said, "Oh my gosh, I want to borrow that." I'm curious, just a show of hands, if you will. How many of you feel pressure? Not that you necessarily even want it, but feel pressure sometimes to buy something that has a brand name on it. And then we'll see what our answers are in a minute. My son has a friend with ADHD. Always after play dates, he's copying that boy, throwing tantrums, crying if he's not getting what he wants, etc. How can I manage that? Ooh, that's a great question. So, and that's what happens is, it's a great question. We will often copy the behaviors of people that we're with. You might actually, even as an adult, be with someone who uses a word, and then you will start using that word more often in your language. One of the most important things is to talk about that child with your child and say things such as, you know, I've noticed that every time you have a play date with so-and-so, that you start behaving more like him. And start taking yourself out of the picture and having him have more of a balcony view and say, I'm wondering, what do you think people look at when they see him behaving like this? What do you think about him when you see him behaving like this? And now I see you behaving like this. What do you think people are going to see when they see you doing this? Screaming, yelling, behaving like this, throwing tantrums. Is that how we behave in our family? Do you think that's appropriate? I know he does it, but you realize that it's because he has some issues. And I would go over and over it with him until he realizes that this is something that this other boy does and not behavior that's appropriate for him. Then, once you think that has sunken in, the next thing I think I would do is I would say things like, you know, your friend has some issues with throwing temper tantrums, which are not appropriate. How about if you, and put him in charge, how about if you help him learn how to behave in a way that we know is more appropriate, right? Because I know you know how to behave appropriately, but he doesn't. How can you help him? Or maybe I can help him with you. What can we do to help him behave more appropriately so that more people will want to be his friend? Because my guess is that when children behave like that, especially at 10 years old, he probably doesn't have a lot of friends, and people probably make fun of him. So make your son in charge, if you will, of his care or of his therapy, and have him be in charge. And then keep reminding your son that, and praise him for, oh my gosh, that was wonderful how you really helped guide him not to throw a temper tantrum today. And if you know your son is 8 and the boy is 10, my guess is that boy is probably behaving more like a 6-year-old or a 4-year-old. So have your son really be the one to set that example. Is that helpful enough? I hope that's enough to guide you with that answer. Yeah, see, and your son is his only friend. So, and that's part of the problem. I am hoping though that your son has other friends though. And then if your son has other friends who are more appropriate, again, the problem with young children, even at this age, is that they don't often see things other than what's right in front of him. So when your son's in bed or at the dinner table, talk to him about his experiences playing with other friends and his friend who has the ADHD, and then compare the two, and have him learn to take that more global view of what's going on. And I hope that helped. Before you talk about giving food to children, whenever I want to give food to the baby, he doesn't want, and I have running behind him, and it's hard. Time I want to talk to him, but still, same if I order from outside, he doesn't want to wait for it. How old, John, how old is the child that you're chasing with the food? Because it's usually a different answer depending on how old they are. 4 years old. Okay, great. So first of all, let's talk about food, if you will. We'll go on to a totally different topic, but it's important because I think a lot of people don't know this. The amount of food that your child needs to eat at any meal is the size of their fist. So I'm going to assume that your child who is 4 has a fist that is probably, that big. That's the amount of food that they need in order to be satisfied. Dinner time or a meal time for a 4-year-old is probably not more than 5 or 10 minutes. So you've got to make use of that time. The other thing too is you've got to make them want to sit at the table in small increments. So, and I'm serious here, get a timer. But if you can make a meal with your 4-year-old last 3 minutes and then time it, and then maybe 3 or 4 days later, make it 3.5 minutes. And then 3 or 4 days later, make it 4 minutes, and keep adding incrementally. Having the ability, the patience to sit at a meal is actually a learned skill. So make sure that the conversation is something that's really meaningful to the child so that they see that dinner time or meal times are important. And I'll get to what I did with my kids in a minute, but I'll give you some simple suggestions first. At dinner today, we're going to sit and talk about something really important, which is a surprise for tomorrow. So sit down, take a few bites. I have to think about how I'm going to approach it with you as your child is eating, because tomorrow we're going to go somewhere, and it's going to take a few minutes to drive there, but it's going to be so exciting. Okay, take another bite. And then I think there's going to be, and then you have to plan this. It has to actually happen, but you drag on the conversations that your 4-year-old is taking a bite. What I used to do with my children was I had something I called the heavy question. So I don't know if you know, I'm also a professor, and I would give them what I called heavy questions. They were really moral dilemmas, even when they were 4 years old and older. And I would say things like, I have a problem. So one of my students told me this. She doesn't know what to do. And I said, I would ask you because I think you're smart enough to know the answer. She has a child who's 4 years old, just like you. And the other day she saw him and he stole something out of her purse and she doesn't know what to do. So I said, oh, I have a 4-year-old. Let me ask my 4-year-old what he thinks is appropriate. And so in this way, I'm teaching my child how to live in a more moral way, to have a moral compass, but I'm not addressing him, I'm addressing somebody else. And this way, he's thinking that he's helping me with a big grown-up problem, and they sit at the dinner table. If you email me, I'll put my email address here. I have a list of all kinds of heavy questions that I've made a list for people at the, oh gosh, I made it a while ago. So there's my email address. If you email me, I'll list, it's just a simple list of heavy questions that I'm happy to send to you. But it's great because moral dilemmas, especially when you relate them to other children, are great ways for your child to learn something without seeing that it's actually being directed to them. So it can be things like, oh my gosh, I ran into a friend of mine. I haven't seen her in 20 years, and she has a child just like yours, and he's 4 years old. And I got to tell you the story. It's crazy. And she bought him a brand new pair of Nikes. They cost like $150. And as soon as he got them, it wasn't the color he really wanted. He took them outside and he filled them up with sand. Oh my gosh. So she asked me, because, I do parenting lectures, what should she do? I said, I would ask you. So ask your 4-year-old and say, what should I tell her to do? I didn't know what the answer was. What do you think she should do? Because he didn't like it. He was so upset that it wasn't the right color. By putting this into your child's brain, what we're actually doing is we're providing children with scripts. And many of you have probably had this issue before, where something happened during the day and you lay in bed at night and you think, oh my gosh, I should have done this. I should have done this. If it ever happens again, this is what I'm going to do. You'll know what to do in the moment if you already have the script for how to deal with it. And so by giving your children these kinds of moral dilemmas ahead of time, you're giving your children scripts in their brains for how to handle dilemmas when they come up some other time in life. This was a great question though about the food, and it triggered something else for me, which is for those of you who have older children, especially now if they're going to school remotely. I want to share something. There's something called the 20-20-20 rule. 20-20-20. Remember this. For every 20 minutes that you sit at a computer, and you'll notice me sometimes doing this and looking off to the side. For every 20 minutes that you're staring at a screen close to you, you're supposed to look off to the distance 20 feet away for 20 seconds. And it helps retain good eyesight, because staring at something close to you, your phone or a computer, long-term effects can be detrimental to your vision and to your brain. So when your children are looking at a computer or doing Zoom, what you might want to do is stand behind the computer 20 feet away and then just ask them a question to force them to look up from the screen and at you far away for 20 seconds to help improve their eyesight. The other thing too is with Zoom, even though I'm looking at you and you can all see my face and you can hear my voice, this still isn't real human connection. And if you do have a child who is learning on Zoom and their teachers are not connecting in a way that is more close like this, that's why I like to take my screen down and stop screen sharing, because I'm looking to connect with humans. Try talking to your child's teacher and saying, you know, I'm wondering if there can be a little bit more human connection. For example, when we're on Facebook or social media, we're not always as polite, and we sometimes say things we regret only because we don't see the human at the other side. But if we see the human at the other side of this, we teach children again how to connect with human beings. And that is the part that they're missing out most right now in this pandemic, is that connection and seeing reactions. So you can see me, but I can't see you. So you've seen my reaction when I give you the questions, when you give me the questions and I answer them, but I don't see your reactions. And we need to learn how to read somebody else's face in order to know how to gauge how the conversation continues. So for example, if you asked me a question and I went like this, you might think, oh, she thinks that's a really stupid question. Or if you ask me a question and you could see my face and I gave an answer and you go, oh, she doesn't understand what I'm saying. I can't see any of your faces, so I can't gauge whether or not my answers are helping other than Anna Maria, for example, here, who put it into the chat box. So this is the part that we're missing out on more than ever now. It's important that you speak low and slow and allow your children to gauge your reactions to things. I also want to share, because I don't see any other questions, I do want to share one other story with you, if you will. And then maybe if there's no other questions, I'll leave you with this today. I call it Man on the Bus. And all of my children, as a matter of fact, I have about 140 employees. All my employees know this story as well. And you'll see where I'm getting with this. There's a man who gets on the bus and his head is down and he puts the money into the bus, or his card, whatever you have nowadays. I haven't been on a bus in a long time. And he sits by the window and he just looks out the window, and his children who are young follow after him and get on the bus, and he's just looking out the window. His head is elsewhere, and his kids are running up and down the bus going crazy, bothering people on the bus. And I mean, just the guy is not paying attention to his children, and they're making a disaster on the bus. What do you think of this man on the bus who's not dealing with his very out of control children whatsoever, right? Bad parent. We're going to do this whole thing now all over again. And now you're a passenger on the bus, and you notice that the bus stops in front of a hospital. The window is down where you're sitting, and you see the man. He says, "Thank you. I know you did everything you could for her." And he gives another man with a stethoscope around his neck and a white coat a hug as he's saying that. And he forlornly, very solemnly gets on the bus, looks out the window with his head down, and his kids are running up and down on the bus right now. You have no idea what just happened in that hospital. Maybe his wife died, his mother died. You know somebody died. You don't know who, but you know that there was a tragedy in this man's life. And as a result, when he gets on this bus, he can't help but stare out the window because he's got this heaviness in his heart. What do you think now about this man as a father, as his children are running up and down on that bus? Whenever somebody says something, oh my God, look at him. He's probably such a jerk. Or how did he raise his kids that way? The answer at work with everybody I know is always man on the bus. We have no idea why somebody is behaving the way they are, or what their life story is that brought them to this point, and why they are not able to manage that situation in this moment. And rather than judging them very harshly and looking down on them, what if we instead have compassion and give them the benefit of the doubt? So by teaching your children a story like this when they're old enough to understand, and then when they see something in the streets or in life and they say, oh my God, what a jerk, and you simply say, maybe man on the bus, you teach your children to not only have gratitude for them not being in that situation, but to also judge everyone with a modicum of benefit of the doubt, if you will. Imagine what a world it would be if we gave everybody that kind of benefit of the doubt. And instead of raising children who are bratty and spoiled, we instead raise children to have gratitude for what they have and to see others with a more favorable eye rather than a negative eye, and maybe lend in a helping hand. If there are no other questions, that's it for me for today. I thank you all for joining me today. You have my email address in the chat box. You can always email me your questions, and to the best of my ability, I will help you out. And I'll stay for a couple more minutes to see if there are any other questions, but just remember, man on the bus. Thank you, Miriam. That's my mom's name. I'll never forget your name. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, if you don't take anything home with you, man on the bus, especially if you see me in the streets, losing my cool. Just remember, man on the bus, woman on the bus. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, I'll leave it one more minute for any questions. Otherwise, thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful week, and hope it's filled with only joy and love and good health. Take care. Bye-bye.